Morning, guys. Morning. Hey, before I get into, we're into 2 Kings now, I just want to say thank you so much for an incredible week. Guys, I have really, really loved this week. I want to say particular thank you to the several students throughout the week who have come up to me and had the courage to push back against things that I've said or ask for clarification about things that rubbed you the wrong way. I think that's really important. And I want to say thank you to those of you that have come up and just given me a pat on the back and said, I'm praying for you. And thank you especially to all the staff and all the adult leaders that have made this week really great for me. And most important, I want to say thank you to those of you who have shared those weird little things that God has done in your life, because that is the stuff that gets me up in the morning every day. So thank you very much, CRY. Let's get into 2 Kings. We're going to look at the first few verses of 2 Kings chapter 2, the end of Elijah, as we know him. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, we've come to the very last moments of his life here on earth. The Lord is about to take him back up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went together down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" And Elisha says, "Yes, I know," he replied. And then this is actually in the Bible. You can look it up. So be quiet. It's like one of my favorite parts of the Bible. The prophets of Bethel come out, and it's almost like they're haters. Elisha has said, even though you told me to stay put, Elijah, I'm going to go where you go. And he follows him to Bethel. And then the company of prophets come out of Bethel, and they say to him, don't you know that the Lord is going to take Elijah away from you today? And he says, "Yes, I know, so be quiet." So then Elijah says to him again, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And Elisha replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went together to Jericho. And this happens again. The company of prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied. "So be quiet." Then Elijah said to him a third time, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan River. It's the place of spiritual crossover, the place of spiritual transformation." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. And this is where they leave the rest of the prophets behind. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, now that he had proven himself, "I'm not going to leave you, no matter what you say, no matter what anybody else says. I'm staying with you all the way up to the end." And they, through this miracle, crossed together across the Jordan River, and it's just the two of them. And now Elijah turns to him and says, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" That's a pretty big moment right there. I mean, think about the things that God has done through Elijah. Stopped the rain, called fire down from heaven, raised people from the dead. Elisha could ask for anything that he wants. I mean, he could ask for fame or power or wealth or the wildest dreams in his own heart, but he's smart enough not to waste this ask on anything so silly and small and temporary. He goes way bigger than that. He says, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. A double portion of your spirit. The raising people from the dead, calling fire down from heaven, controlling the weather spirit. Let me have a double portion of that. And Elijah responds, "You have asked a difficult thing. Yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not. If you see me when I'm taken from you, if you stick with me to the very end, if you follow me to the very end, if you pay attention, then what you have asked will be yours. Now, what Elisha is asking, therefore, is if you look in Deuteronomy about inheritance laws, the double portion was the prescription for what the oldest child would get. So it doesn't mean twice the power of Elijah. He's saying, among all of your spiritual sons and daughters, I want to be the firstborn. I want to get the inheritance of the firstborn. I want to be the one that follows in your footsteps. I want to be the one that serves as the leader to the prophets. I want to do your job, my spiritual father, when you move on. And Elijah says, well, you've asked for a difficult thing. But if you pay attention and follow me to the end, it will be yours. And it just makes me wonder, what might happen if we paid attention, if we followed God like that? It's an important thing to think about, because normally when God works, it's the kind of thing you don't notice, you miss or dismiss if you're not paying attention. Because sometimes, yes, God calls fire down from heaven and controls the weather and raises the dead, but sometimes he just makes that little bit of flour reappear in the jar over and over again, and that little bit of oil reappear in the jar over and over again. Something that somebody looking in from the outside would say, whatever, it's not a big deal. But to that particular person, the widow and her son who were starving, they knew. They knew. Elisha, later on, one of the miracles that he does is he makes an axe head float in the water, which is a miracle. Axe heads do not float. But it's weird. I mean, I don't know about you, but if it was me, I'd be tempted to dismiss it and just be like, I don't know, it was a trick. I just don't care. That's just not that impressive to me. When Jesus called the first disciples, he went to fishermen who had been fishing all night long. And he told them, you know what, go lay out your nets one more time. And they thought he was ridiculous. But Peter said, nevertheless, because you've asked me to do it, I'll do it. And he put down his net, and there's so many fish in the net, they couldn't haul it up into the boat. And I don't know about you, but for me, I might be like, okay, a coincidence. Coincidences like that happen. But the thing is, Peter knew. To him, he knew. He was a professional fisherman who had toiled day and night for years, and they'd fished all that night, and he went to all the spots that he knew about, and he knew. After that miracle, he fell on his knees and he said, go away from me, Lord, because I'm a sinful man. And a lot of times, the way God works in life is so personal and particular to the person's heart that he's trying to touch, that if you're a little bit jaded and a little bit cynical, or if you're not paying attention, it's easy to miss it, and it's easy to dismiss it. Part of this has to do with just the way our brains work, the way attention works. So you may not realize this, but they've done all kinds of interesting studies on this topic, that what you actually see and notice in the world has to do with your goals, what you're paying attention to. Like literally what you actually see has to do with your goals. You don't see things that aren't a part of the direction that you're headed in. And they've done all kinds of amazing studies about this. I'll just give you a quick illustration on your own body right now. If you are wearing socks, or if not, flip-flops or boat shoes, bring your attention to the feel of your socks on your feet right now. And you'll realize, like, oh, I can feel my socks. You didn't a second ago, because you weren't paying attention. And now you're like, man, I don't really want to feel my socks anymore. I want to go back to not feeling my socks. Or have you ever become conscious of your breath and you start breathing on purpose? And then you can't stop. You're like, I don't want to have to make this happen all the time. I want to go back to not paying attention to it. This world is so vast There's so much going on. There are so many sights and sounds and smells and so many things you could be paying attention to and so many things that you could be thinking. And we are so tiny that you just have to narrow your focus. You have no choice but to decide what you're going to pay attention to. And what that means is what you actually see depends upon what you're paying attention to. So a couple of interesting studies. A lot of times we miss stuff if it's an anomaly, if it's not something that we're expecting. So this one dude, he did this study where he walked around downtown Manhattan naked and photographed people's reactions. And there's some really funny photos online. Like there's one where he's doing like the Sasquatch, like walking across the street like this, totally naked, surrounded by people in power suits and briefcases, commuters on their way to their work, and they don't even notice him. They just walk right by him because it's like an anomaly. It's not supposed to be happening, so they don't even notice. They did another study where they brought some college students into a room and had them watch a video recording of some people in a gymnasium, and they had a ball, and they were tossing the ball back and forth. And they told the college students, what we want you to do is count how many times the ball gets tossed back and forth before they fumble it or drop it or whatever. And so the college students did this. They watched 1, 2, 3, 4, tried to get the count just right. And afterwards, they had them do a little debrief survey. And then the people administering the test said to them, hey, did you happen to notice the guy in the gorilla suit? And well over half of them had no idea what they were talking about. And they replayed the video, and lo and behold, right in the middle of that ball being tossed back and forth, a guy walks out in the middle of the stage in a gorilla suit, center court, waves and dances. And they literally did not see the guy in the gorilla suit because their focus, their goal, their attention was on counting how many times that ball went back and forth. And so again, that makes me wonder, what would happen if we paid attention? What might we not miss? What might we not dismiss if we follow Jesus to the end, the way Elisha followed Elijah, the man of God, up to the very end? In what ways might God's Spirit visit upon us and act through us? And this is really important because God works in some weird ways. He works in very tailored, particular ways. I'll give you one example from my own life. Now, I've talked in years past about how I came to believe in all this stuff. I was an atheist for most of my young adulthood until one day when I started to read the Bible, and I was just blown away by the Bible, blown away by it. Nothing at all like it had been represented to me. And I'll just say to you guys real quick, if your whole understanding of Scripture is what other people have told you about it, you really owe it to yourself to actually read it for yourself sometime, because it might be nothing at all like what other people have told you about it. And I was just blown away. I've never read about anything like this. And that was the bulk of how I came to believe in this, but there was 1,000 other things. There was little conversations with people and snippets of things I heard on the radio and little books and articles that I read and conversations with people. And here's one of those things. One day I came home to my little dingy apartment that I was renting a few blocks away from the university I dropped out of about a year ago, and coming home from one of my 2 jobs and dragged myself up the stairs, and I saw all these little plastic bags hanging from the doorknobs in the apartments inside my building. And some of the kids from the first floor were running through the building, and they were reaching into each of the bags and taking out these chocolate bars that were in the bags. And they cleaned up, man. They went through they probably got 100 chocolate bars because they ran through the whole building and got them all. So I got to my apartment, and I opened up my bag. Did not have a chocolate bar in it any longer, but it had some little pamphlets and literature and stuff from a local church, and it had a VHS in it. Do you guys know what a VHS is? Yeah. Wow. You're unexpectedly excited about that. I pulled out this VHS, and it was a copy of the Jesus video. Are any of you familiar with the Jesus video? Do you know what this thing is? Wow, not many. So the Jesus video is this very bizarre, very low-budget film that is basically kind of a play-for-play depiction of the Gospel of Mark. Like, I think every word in the video is straight from Scripture, and the scenes are just non-flashy depictions of what the text actually says. And it's a very odd video for a couple of reasons. The Jesus guy is really intense. He's got kind of a big forehead and these big eyes, and he just really intense but weirdly arresting, like he would grab your attention. And then also, they filmed the video intentionally so you hardly ever see anyone's lips moving. So they would always be like Jesus talking to his disciples, and you'd see their faces, but he hit the back of his head. And the reason they did that is so they could easily dub it in every language that exists in the world. And missionaries have created this, translated this video into basically every language that exists. And they'll go play this video in the middle of nowhere. I mean, set up an inflatable screen in the bush in the middle of nowhere and gather a crowd and play the Jesus video. Rick Warren, the pastor of Saddleback Church, said that it is the greatest evangelizing tool in modern Christianity. I don't think it's less than millions of people have given their lives to Jesus through this weird Jesus video. So, weird little thing, but let me tell you how weird it is for me. The copy that I got was in Mandarin because there's a lot of Chinese people living in my building. It was subtitled in English, fortunately, because I don't speak Mandarin. But I went inside and I popped this thing in the VCR. That's what you play a VHS in, if you don't know that. And I popped this thing in and I watched the Jesus video in Mandarin and read the subtitles at the bottom. And I was just twisted up into it. I mean, the story of this man, this innocent man, voluntarily choosing such an agonizing death for people that turned on him and hated him, and then as he bled to death from the cross, forgiving them. It took me away. It's the story of stories. It's the archetype of stories. It's the foundation of all stories. It's the apex of all stories. There is no greater story that's ever been told. And it got to the end of that video and they give this little suggested prayer. If you feel like Jesus is who he claimed to be, then pray this prayer. And I got down on my knees in my apartment, and as they prayed in Mandarin, I prayed in English and accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Now after that, I went to a church that I had been invited to, and I listened to a sermon and learned about baptism, and then I found out about other things. I found out about this elderly couple, Mike and Harriet Mitchell, who lived down the street from my family as I grew up, and they prayed for the people on our block, and they prayed for us for 20 years. And then in the span of a year, my older brother was baptized, and 6 months later I was baptized, and 6 months after that my younger brother was baptized. And I only found out about them because I ended up going to their church, and then we somehow pieced it together that they had been praying for me and my family. Here's where I'm trying to go with all this. Only God could have pulled together the 1,000 of random, weird little touches that he used to change my heart. People who prayed, who said a word, who were there for me, who encouraged me, the answered prayers, the times that I prayed, the Jesus video, what my experiences with Scripture, when I finally went to church and heard sermons and went to small groups and was encouraged and had questions answered. And it's 1,000 different people. We could never design a program. We could never design a church or a ministry that would do all the various things that God did in my life to gradually convince me that he was real. There is nothing that any of us can do to change a human heart. But there is nothing that God cannot use to change a human heart. And most of the things that he uses are so individual, they're so personal, that you would miss them or you would dismiss them if you're not paying attention. And so it just makes me wonder what would happen if we all went home from this week and we paid attention. Because you better believe, you left your life for this week and came here, but God never did. And God has been all over the lives of every single person represented by those names on that board. And he's been pulling together 1,000 different little things. And maybe they're missing them. And maybe they're dismissing them. But he has been furiously, passionately at work in their lives. The God that gave the most precious thing he had, the life of his only beloved Son, will not stop short to do every last little thing he can possibly do, to win over every last heart that he can possibly win over. And whether or not you pay attention, whether you miss it or dismiss it, you better believe that God is at work in the lives of all the people around what you're doing. Now, I've done a lot of teaching like this at this point in my life in a lot of different contexts, one-on-one, over a coffee, Bible studies, little gritty inner city churches, big churches, conferences, etc. And sometimes I feel like I did a good job, and sometimes I feel like I totally blew it. The times that I remember, though, are the times when something happens that I can't do. So, for example, I was teaching at this little church plant in Manhattan a few years ago. Not the one that I was a part of, it was a different one. And it was a totally forgettable message. I have no idea what I even talked about. But I do remember the text was Jesus, his words about building your house on the rock instead of building your house on sand. And at some point in that message, I must have said something like, have you ever wondered whether this might be a foundation issue? And after that message, this couple came up to me, and the guy was like trembling, like something was going on with him. Not a believer at this point in his life, but something was messing with him. And fortunately, I was paying attention. You know, usually when you come off stage, you're paying attention, so it kind of helps you. But I was paying attention. And I said, what's going on with you? And he said, on the train on the way here, I said those exact words. We were having a big fight, and I turned to my girlfriend and I said, what if this is a foundation issue? Unfortunately, I was paying attention. And so I said, do you think that was a coincidence? And he thought for a long moment. His face got real serious, and he said, no. That can't be a coincidence. And I said, that cannot be a coincidence. Not a big thing to anybody else, but to him, he knew that that was God. And it just makes me wonder what might happen in the lives of the people around you if you paid attention. You know, Peter was able to walk on water so long as he kept his eyes on Jesus. What might it mean, the double portion of the Spirit, if you paid attention? If only we had somebody in all the world who could go back and live your life, but with his or her eyes open, following Jesus every step of the way. If only we had somebody who would ask, even if just occasionally, God, what are you doing here? God, is there anything that you want me to do? And maybe you don't ask it very often at first, but maybe you only ask it once in the morning. That would be a quantum leap forward. If you asked it one time in the morning, or when you get in over your head, when you're in a situation where you feel like you don't know what to say, or something needs to be said and you don't know how to say it. What if you asked, God, what are you doing here? Is there anything that you want me to do? If only we had someone to go back into your life and ask themselves those questions. There's nothing that any of us can do to change anybody's heart. But there's no one that God won't use to change somebody's heart. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to have any skills. You don't even have to get it right half the time. You just got to pay attention. God does have somebody like that. There's only one person in all the world. One person he made exactly the way that he made you, because you were the one that he wanted to live your life, and there's nobody else that can fill your shoes. It's you. I hope that you'll go back with your eyes open. I hope you'll pay attention. I want to pray that you will.